Hello. We are here today to launch the findings of a survey that we've carried out globally into pre-sales hiring and candidate assessments. And we are very privileged to have a dream team panel here of Greg Holmes and Malcolm Murphy. I think we're especially lucky in the sense that both are kind of established independent thinking thought leaders, and also have kind of lots of real world experience hiring managers. So thank you both so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Super. So for those that don't know you, and I suppose starting with Malcolm, are you able to kind of briefly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, no problem. Malcolm Murphy. I am currently sales engineering director for Mimecast in the UK. I have been in sales and sales engineering leadership roles for most of the last 20 something years. And I've been hiring people since the mid 90s. I did try and figure out, I did a ready reckoner of how many interviews I think I've done over that period. It's a big number. No one needs to know the details, but it's a big number.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And Greg?
Yeah, I'm Area Vice President for Solutions at Aptio, focused around the European market and Middle East and Africa as well. Like Malcolm, I've probably interviewed hundreds of people for different pre-sales roles of all sorts of levels. And for me, it's a very interesting part of the job, because it's the one where so much of your work is not noticed. It's only the final decision that really gets judged and really gets understood by the whole team. So, it's an exciting area. I'm sure it's an area that many managers can focus on how to improve, how to get it right, how to think about your decisions quickly, but also make the right decisions.
Super. And I completely agree. It's like the analogy with the duck swimming along the lake. No, there's a lot of work in the background that goes on. So I wholeheartedly agree there. Good. Okay, so we wanted to make the conversation as kind of free-flowing as possible, but also, I think it's important to set up the report and what we looked into. So I'm going to try now to very briefly and succinctly talk through what the report was about, what the survey was about, and kind of key findings, and then we're going to launch into some questions for Greg and for Malcolm. So. The report that we're launching is a first of its kind in pre-sales, we believe, and we surveyed 103 pre-sales managers from across the globe. So they ranged from team leaders with 1 or 2 reports up to global heads, and I think the average number of reports or people they're managing was 27 individuals. So I think that's a lot of kind of collective hiring experience. And we asked 52 questions around 3 main areas. So number 1 is, what do hiring managers look for in pre-sales when they hire, how they assess those characteristics, and then how they kind of measure their own ability to assess and improve their own assessment process. Alongside that, we had 13 conversations with different hiring managers to kind of put some more kind of meat on the bone, let's say, as we went through. And we are today launching a report with the data and then 6 recommendations from our side. And so we feel that it's valuable if you're a manager. Obviously, it's really important it's really useful to understand what your peers think, what the kind of the collective hive thinks in terms of hiring. And we also think, for individual contributors that are going to be interviewing, there's a bit of a cheat sheet there in terms of it gives you quite a clear idea in terms of what pre-sales managers are really kind of looking for. So in terms of the punchline, so I'd say the picture at the end is that hiring really is a fundamental part of success within pre-sales. The difference between a bad hire, a good hire, and a superstar hire is significant. And I think let's walk through first of all. So in terms of the picture of what pre-sales managers look for in their kind of ideal candidate, and obviously these are averages, and we'll change as per position. So to talk through the top 3 in terms of competencies, so building trust was number 1, kind of curiosity and constant learning was number 2. Collaboration was number 3. And then in terms of the different job components, working with account executives came in as number 1. Delivery of demos, presentations, and so on came in as number 2. And objection handling was number 3. And I'll just add on to that, discovery was number 4. Okay. So how about we pause there for a moment? Greg, any thoughts on that in terms of what the picture of the ideal candidate looks like?
I think it's a quite interesting result, because all of the things you're describing are not hard skills. Like, they're all very much about the softer part of how do you work with other people, how do you work with customers, how do you listen and understand what people are asking, and how do you respond to that. So those are things that you can't just give someone an aptitude test or look at their certifications list or things like that, right? And give them a coding test and get an instant result of, oh, this person's going to be a good SE. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, being the hardest to measure as well. And there was a slide, there was a question later on around the preference between, basically the question was, if you have to trade off between hit the ground running, great hard skills match, versus need some ramp up time but has a high ceiling of potential. There was 2 bumps in the graph, and we think that that's because if it's a more technical role, hard skills become more prominent. But there was a big skew towards hiring for a high ceiling of potential over hard skills. So Malcolm, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of trading off, or from your experience where you have to trade off hard skills with kind of high potential.
So I would personally very, very much agree with that preference most times, unless you've got a specific urgent business need for a specific technology area. I think 99 times out of 100, I'd probably be going for the person with the potential. Skills are trainable, so that is that's the thing. As you were talking there, I was thinking something else though, which is from a candidate's point of view. So we're talking about cheat sheet for candidates. If you look at CVs and you think about how people approach interviews, in my experience, they tend to major on the hard skills and the technical skills.
Yeah.
And so this apparent disconnect, what we're saying as pre-sales leaders is, hey, we're looking for A, B, and C, and what candidates often present to us is X, Y, and Z. And I think that disconnect is very, very stark. So anybody looking at this report as an individual contributor going, why aren't I doing well in interviews? Well, maybe you're misaligning what you're presenting compared to what we want.
I think that's a great point. And I think the adage is, what is it? It's a higher attitude trained skills is the phrase. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of how candidates can look at this. And also, I think it should be quite heartening in the sense that sometimes as a candidate you can look at a job spec and think, oh, I don't tick all of the boxes, but actually it's not that important to tick all the boxes from like a hard skills perspective, and you really can influence the result of the interview process through your kind of demonstration of those softer skills. Okay, good.
So I just add one thing, John. And one of the best interviews or best candidate interviews I've ever had, candidate described to me his process for learning new stuff. Yeah. He described his lab environment. He said, I do this. He said, I know it doesn't stick first. It was a very intentional acquiring skills process that he had. And I'm looking at that going, okay, I can just throw you on stuff. You're going to put it in this machine that works. And it just solved all my worries about, can he learn the stuff?
Yeah. And that kind of sense of people that intrinsically enjoy learning are always going to be that way, So brilliant. Okay, that's great. So in terms of just the last finding, we looked at kind of how the interview process is structured and measured. And I think here is where we, in our opinion, there really is kind of scope for the pre-sales profession to professionalize further, especially around kind of candidate assessment and how we structure the interview process. And so, we feel that there are some quick wins that don't actually cost anything that can help with that process. And for me personally, it feels a little bit like, and I don't know, Greg and Malcolm, what you think on this, that how we design the assessment process is a little bit in no man's land in terms of who has overall responsibility of that. And the industry's kind of converged on this standard of, hiring manager interview, someone senior interview, and then a panel, and then throw in some more people. And I don't know how often organizations are actually looking at that process and saying, right, how can we improve this? So Greg, I'm going totally away from the questions that we talked about beforehand. Straight away. Greg, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and also from a candidate point of view, being in part of a process that just seems very long, with many stages, with many unconnected steps, is never a great experience. And I think the best candidates will get hired if your process is too long before you get a chance to make them an offer. So make sure that your process is optimized to have the parts in it that matter to you as a hiring manager.
Yeah.
If there's, extra things that, someone would like to meet them or something like that, that isn't going to change your decision, then try to separate that out from the process. You can always arrange extra meetings for people once you've already offered them the job or you have everything lined up in your decision process, but don't put steps in front of a candidate that aren't going to help you. Okay,
that's good. And it's interesting, actually. One of the slides that we have talked through the different interview types that there are. So hiring manager interview and the panel interview with different leaders, psychometrics, that sort of thing. And Malcolm, I know from the conversation we were having before we kind of pressed record that you found that especially interesting. What were your thoughts on that slide in particular?
Yeah, so that slide, there's a graph in there, it's a stacked bar chart, and what it really shows is there's a couple of elements of the selection process that hiring managers really, really value. And then there's a massive decay. So there's a load of other things that we do that the data says don't influence the hiring decision.
Yeah.
And so, as Greg said, the extra steps, they're just difficult and they're potentially irritating for candidates as well. And the question that comes to me out of that data is, why are we doing this stuff? If it's not going to influence the decision, are we just doing it because that's what we do? And my recommendation, the thing that comes out is be very, very intentional again. Design your hiring process. And the question implicit in what you're saying there, John, is who's responsible?
Yeah.
And I think that in a lot of organizations, there's too many cooks, or there's, we have a TA team, we have an HR team, and we tend to defer to them or go with a blueprint of a process. I would always say, you're the hiring manager.
Yeah.
You own making sure the process is as efficient and effective as it possibly can be. And I've personally, whenever I've gone to colleagues in HR and said, I want to change this up, I want to do it this way, no one's ever said, no, you have to do it this way because we have a process. They said, okay, that makes sense. We've got these requirements. We need to make sure, you're assessing it. But if you can do it better, then do it better. I think grab hold of the process, know what you want to get out of each stage, and if you don't value it, don't do it.
Yeah, 100%. The accountability is such an important part of the success of a pre-sales organization hiring, that you've got to be responsible for it yourself, with the support, obviously, of the different organizations within the company. And Greg, just to build on that, so why do you think it happens that we add these steps to the process? And from your perspective, what steps do you think that managers can take to make it slicker?
Yeah, so I think a lot of managers are concerned about the consensus, right? They're trying to hire someone to support another part of the organization. And whenever you're doing that, you're concerned about how will it land. I think the number one thing is how well do the SEs work with the account managers. That was one of the top criteria. So in order to ensure that, you then rely on other people's opinions that, this person's a good cultural fit. They seem to understand how the sales process works and all of those sorts of things. You're asking someone who doesn't fully understand pre-sales and maybe what you're looking for their opinion. So in order to minimize that, you might need some consensus, but I would try and consolidate those people into the panel or something like that you are going to do anyway.
Yeah.
And that's their chance to assess those things.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to see someone in action. They're only going to get an imperfect, small glimpse of the person in action, but that has to be enough to convince them. And if they've got concerns, they can voice them to you. You can take it on board, but you don't have to take every person's individual opinion fully to heart when it comes to is this person going to be good for the job?
Yeah, 100%. And I absolutely agree in terms of, you know, sometimes it does feel that managers do feel that they, especially from the sales side, need to bring people in. And then the panel is just such an effective way of doing that. Because also from a candidate's experience perspective, it's pretty painful as well, going through these steps. Okay, good. So the last question for now from my side is around interview training, or interview training support. So we asked the different managers how satisfied they were with the level of training they've had across their career, and the results are quite surprising. So 33%, 1/3, are satisfied or highly satisfied with the training that they've received across their career. The rest aren't, with 22% of the total, so almost a quarter, who have not received any interview training whatsoever across their career. So it's clear that there's a picture here of people being left to their devices to some extent. And again, this obviously varies a lot organization by organization. So Malcolm, what's your view on that? Did that surprise you? And what's your view on the level of support and interview training that managers receive?
Yeah, to a certain extent, it did surprise me, but in the sense that 1/3 of people were satisfied with the training that they've received. I was surprised it was that high. And I was surprised that the number of people who've never received any training was only about a quarter. Because in my experience, in my observation as well, I don't think this is something that companies spend a lot of time on in general, training, teaching, developing managers to hire. And then in the subset that's just pre-sales managers, because we do have different requirements and we are a little bit strange, specific pre-sales focused training. So I'm not surprised at a broad thing that says there's lots of work to do. I was actually surprised that the data says that people said, you know, 1/3 of people said they were happy, because I think, I'd be surprised if many people really have had structured, consistent, and maybe reinforced training. Because you go to a training course and it teaches you how to hire and to say ask situational questions, but then are we actually following up on that? Are we doing the reinforcement after an interview and saying, did you really interview that way? And I'm not sure to what extent that's actually happening out there in the wild.
Yeah, completely. So I 100% agree, Malcolm, and I'm going to take the other position to ask the question to Greg, just to kind of take a perspective. So if someone were to say, look, you know, managers know that it's important, and ultimately they can go off and they can do their own learning, and you kind of learn through experience, and you know things, you know, there's an art and a science to interviewing, and structure isn't that important. What would you say in that respect?
Yeah, I think as a management team, you build up your cadence of how you run an effective hiring process. And I think that does come as much with experience as training. But I think the importance of the training aspect is that it's ensuring that everyone is on the same page with what your process is about. I think there's some basic general training everyone should do around interviews specifically. Like, I think we all think we're great at asking questions and selling and things like that. But I think there's a nuance to it when it comes to interviewing that is, you know, a specialist area that pre-sales leaders particularly need to get into, right? Because it isn't something that your basic sales training, your basic pre-sales, you know, demo training or any of those things necessarily prepares you for.
Yeah.
And it's one of those examples of things that what got you here doesn't get you, you know, to the next level. Yeah. So really honing in on what do you want to get out of the process, you know, getting together as a team before the hiring process starts, assigning roles, you know, if there's different meetings and stages going on, what is each person looking for in their stage, in their meeting? You know, it's no sense all of you asking the same top 5 best interview questions ever
100%.
than coming out with the same opinion and then getting blindsided by something that nobody asked.
Yeah, 100%. That's great. Yeah, fully agree there. And I think the quote is there's not the quote. Sorry, there was I don't know if you heard of the survey. I think it was in Australia actually. So there was a survey of they asked. So 93% of drivers said they were above average at driving. And I think interviewing probably in that bucket as well.
Yeah.
In the sense that cool. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you so much, and I believe it's so nice that you also give some advice on the candidates as well, like how they should present themselves in an interview or how they should build their series. We are going to have some snapshots of this video to also send the candidates. Maybe it is going to be useful for them. And another interesting finding, it was somehow something that we expected. If you remember, we also discussed about intuition during our last conversations. So the survey results indicate that a significant proportion of pre-sales managers rely heavily on intuition in the hiring process. So to be specific, 58% said their own intuition was 8 out of 10 important or more, and 89% rate their own intuition as 6 out of 10 important or higher. And as a result of this reliance on personal intuition, the hiring managers rate their own interview one-to-one stage as most effective of all the job components. So should managers trust their own gut, or is there too much reliance on intuition? I would love to hear both perspectives. So Malcolm, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think the answer to the two parts of your question is yes to both. But let me elaborate. I think yes, you have to listen to your gut. So in my experience, that voice in the back of your head that says there's something going on here that you're not uncovering with your questioning, I need to listen to that voice. But and maybe I think about it this way. I'm not saying never. I would try to never hire somebody just based on my gut. I'm looking for evidence when it comes to hiring. Where I'm really wanting to listen to the voice in the back of my head is when you think, okay, there's something wrong here. And again, it's difficult. We're human beings, and we don't think like machines. But I listen to that voice and say, okay, go look for more evidence. And that's where I try and do it. I think the way I read the data about people using their intuition, I see that as a consequence of what we've just been discussing around about lack of training and maybe less well-developed processes. And so people are going with their gut feeling. So I think if we can, as an industry, do better on that one, then the gut will minimize. So yes, I think it's important. Yes, you have to listen to your experience. But try and use it as a signpost to look for evidence rather than a decision criterion.
Okay, thank you so much. And it makes perfect sense to listen to that gut feeling when something is wrong. Yeah, maybe there is something beyond the questioning skills. And Greg, what is your input here? What do you think?
Yeah, I think like Malcolm, I would use your intuition to help uncover any red flags, right? And investigate. And sometimes you can prove yourself wrong, right? You thought that something was a problem, and then you go out and test it, but then you've gone and tested it. So I think using your intuition as a directional tool, but it's not able to help you measure necessarily how strong something is. So I think you want to back it up with some evidence. Try to use your intuition as a guide to get you in the right direction, but do have some hard and fast tests as well. I think one more thing is, we talked about hard skills versus soft skills, and I think people use intuition to try and determine those soft skills. Whilst for hard skills, it's usually evidence-based and it's something that you can measure. So I think, maybe we need to be looking for more ways to measure some of those soft skills as well, rather than just make an intuition-based bet on it.
Yeah.
Super, super. Thank you, Greg. And again, I believe this point of view also makes perfect sense. And we already somehow covered this subject, but our findings also show that only 50% of hiring teams start with a very well-defined matrix of skills and competencies, and only 46% of them have a matrix that is also shared with the team. So I'm not very sure if you have any ideas about how should the responsibility be divided. I know Malcolm already, you said I'm the hiring manager, I take the responsibility. But what about Greg? Do you think it
Yeah.
should be some specific skills that should be measured by the sales team, for example, or?
I think with the recruiting part, like getting new recruits into the funnel of people you're talking to, I think that's where I use a lot of the hard skills kind of checkpoints, domain knowledge. So, sometimes maybe people say that those are less important because all the good candidates with the right hard skills got through the process anyway, right? So you're left with people that you're then assessing on, yeah, they're good enough on all these measures. Now let's just go and check out their soft skills. But I think you still, I've always come up with some kind of a scoring matrix. There are some roles that I've hired for that are very, niche. They're very dependent on domain knowledge, and sometimes more knowledge is better, and worth it, and trading off against certain other things. But then I would still have those other things to be measuring against, right? So you come up with some kind of overall score that matches what you would like, and then you're comparing different candidates based on how well they've done across multiple criteria. So it's rare that you would just go and say, I'm going to hire the best mathematician for this job, right? Or the best chess player for this job, or something like that. You're actually looking for the balance of skills.
Of course, and I believe it's such a good point. I've never thought actually about that, but until you meet the hiring manager, yeah, you go through a lot of of phases, and yeah, maybe the division between hard skills and soft skills wouldn't have been this way if they would have to assess them also in terms of technical skills first. Thank you, very insightful.
Perfect, good stuff. So, in terms of the final, the final couple of questions. So, and this is a personal favourite of mine. I feel like I don't know if either of you have things that you think everyone's crazy, they don't get it, but no one else seems to get it. This is where I feel like I feel a bit like that. So anyway, 73% of organisations don't measure quality of hire. Okay. So in terms of measurement of quality of hire, clearly it doesn't happen that much. Do you think that this is something that should happen more from your experience? What are your opinions in general? We can start with Malcolm, if that's okay.
It's so I agree with you. I think most people would probably say, oh yeah, we know if someone works out or not, and we'd all claim to have some sort of qualitative view of they passed their probation, for example. But I agree with you in that it's not systematic in a lot of places, and I hold my own hands up here as part of the process as we prepared for this. I've reevaluated what I've been doing about that. Okay, it's not great. I think one of the challenges, and one of the things, my own personal conclusion as I've been thinking about what I'm going to do with the output of this report as well, is the in service assessments. We've got skills matrices and other ways of assessing people while they're doing their job, and that's one process over here that actually is not joined up with my hiring process over here. So we hire someone based on a set of criteria, and then we put them into the job and we have a different set of criteria, and they're probably not as joined up as they could be. So it'd be very, very interesting. I think it's a big piece of work. I don't underestimate how difficult bridging that gap is. In my own example, I suspect for a lot of people, but that's probably one of the challenges. There's another point, and I don't know how to resolve this, which is you can only measure the quality of the people that you do hire. Another interesting thing from the process is did your process get you the best candidate? So was there a better candidate that you missed out on? Either your process didn't catch it, or so look, we can measure the false positives. I had someone that weren't great. You can measure the real positives. I had someone that weren't great. What about the false negatives? I didn't hire someone and they would have been great.
Yeah.
And I fear, and comes back to why we have a lot of stages in the process, right? A lot of hiring processes are biased towards saying no. We're very good at finding reasons not to hire people. And that's probably, we should be biased towards no to a certain extent. I wonder if we're over tilted.
Yeah.
And we're not, we run the risk of great candidates not making it through the process.
Yeah,
no idea how we solve that question, by the way, but it's a real concern.
I was thinking if there is any solution for that, but yeah, maybe there is a solution.
I love it. So, okay, so and Greg, before we ask you, a quick question for you, Malcolm, based on that. So you talked about the criteria when you go to hire somebody, you have a set of criteria you're looking at, and then did I understand correctly that in terms of when you look at performance on the job, you look at a different set of criteria?
Well, I think in most organizations, those two processes are different processes.
Right. Okay.
And yes, I think in my experience right now, we're just doing a very, very apposite thing at the moment. We're just doing a piece of work inside the sales engineering organization to assess some functional skills and build out functional skills development across the team globally. And it made me think, okay, to what extent am I assessing for these functional skills in my hiring process? And to what extent are those, quote, soft skills, unquote, that we value enormously in the hiring process, to what extent do we monitor and evaluate and develop them during a skills development process? And this stuff's hard.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very easy to go through a functional skills of, do you know X, Y, Z to ABC level? Very, very easy to do that in a development process. So there's a disconnect there. Okay. It's not insoluble, but I think you have to be very, very purposeful about it.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for the clarification. Greg, what's your opinion in general around measurement of quality of hire?
So I think there's several aspects to it, right? But one issue is most of the real negatives of a bad hire happen a long time after, right? So you've got a lot of trailing kind of indicators that aren't going to help you in a very short and timely manner.
Yeah.
But it's worth measuring anyway, right? I think it's a long-term kind of thing to look at. But I think at the point of hire, I think what it's good to assess is how many of the key criteria did this person meet that you chose, right? How close are they to that perfect fit? And what would you put into their onboarding and into their probation period to make sure that they are getting to where you need them to be? Because I think you've got a very limited time in some parts of the world to really decide, post-hire, was that the right choice? And I think also the onboarding is really the key thing, right? You want, no candidate's perfect, so you need to make sure that you're helping whoever you've hired, he or she, to grow in the areas into the role that you've created for them. And your understanding of that role will change as well once they're getting started. So, really making sure that the fit is perfect. But I'd also point it back to individual parts of the hiring process, right? Whoever's getting you your candidates in, how well did that work? How well did the brief you made the market on the position match, to the people, to attract the right people? But also, is it confusing to them? Did it help get the right people in quickly? One thing I always try and do with my HR partners is look through the list of people that have been rejected, not by me. And in many cases, I've pulled people out of that section of rejected candidates and said, these people actually look interesting to me for this role, and I would like to talk to them, or they're interesting for another related role that we'd like to hire for. So I feel like that's an area, and that's where you can help train your HR business partners to be more understanding of what you're looking for. So I would look at each part of the process and make sure you're not losing quality hires during the process, but that you're also helping the onboarding and their long-term career at your company by checking them against your idea of perfection.
Okay, good. So if I've understood correctly, basically what you're saying is that in terms of the onboarding, from having the different, the different competencies or the different areas that you're looking for, the different criteria, that enables you to improve the onboarding, make it slicker. And then I think that's correct, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. And then in terms of going back into that pool of individuals that have got a no for whatever reason, I think that's a really tangible, easy to do takeaway for any hiring manager listening. And I've not thought of that before, and it does make a lot of sense because we all know it's not a perfect process. People can have a bad day and all those sorts of things, and so it's not it's not a cross on you forever, no. Okay.
Sean, if I can add to that point, because Greg, I've done that as well, and I think it's useful because partly because you're looking at the pool of candidates, but it's also useful because if someone else put a candidate in a no pile and you wouldn't have done, then either the way I think about it is, maybe I haven't figured out my criteria correctly. So maybe this person had, underwater basket weaving on their CV, and I didn't realize that was important to me until I'd seen it. Or maybe, and this is much more likely, I haven't articulated very well what it is that I'm looking for. So by looking at the rejections and testing my assumptions or what I've described to my colleague, and having them test me, said, well, you said you didn't want a person with a blue triangle in the top corner of the CV, and this is constantly refining that and testing it and challenging the assumptions gets you to a better process. So I think that's so important. I'm glad someone else does it.
Excellent. And that's great as well in terms of adding to the review process. And to build on that and related to quality of hire, so the recommendation that we've made is, so if you look at, for example, as an analogy, like stock market investors, they know that they're subject to bias and all that sort of thing. And they experience do the same thing. I think they have that kind of mixture of data and intuition. And they know, so one thing is just looking back afterwards to see your returns. But another thing is at the point of making the investment to take the time to write down what's your thesis, what's your beliefs, and so on. Because as human beings, we tend to change over time as courses evolve. And then without that, you can't then look back and say, well, I got that right and I got that wrong. And so in terms of quality of hire, the recommendation we're making is you've got this matrix already that should be the critical kind of success factors for the position. That's going to be, I think, with most ATSs, those are all scored by the different members of the hiring team across all of the different components. And then if you just effectively add 2 columns to the end of that and do it at 6 months and at 12 months, and if you do that over, let's say you're a second level manager, and you do that over a bunch of 10, 20, 30 hires, you can start to go back and say, okay, so what we thought the person was when they started was this is what they were. We are generally nailing ability to present or sales acumen as an example, but we seem to just be totally random in terms of conscientiousness and resilience and so on. And so you can then say, okay, so in terms of our process, in terms of fine tuning the process, we need to get better here. And also we can be quite confident in ourselves here. And I think in terms of, if you look at, Malcolm, you talked about playing it safe and looking at the candidates that you missed out on. And I think that the more confidence that you have in your process, the more confidence you have to say hell yeah to the person that doesn't necessarily, there might be a risk, a political risk, if that makes sense. And by the same token, you can also start to look at the different members of the hiring team to see how they're assessing. So you may have one hiring manager who is just off the scales good in terms of assessing candidates. And so that person, you can involve them, you can model that, you can involve them more in assessment design and that sort of thing. And you might have, for example, like a head of sales who isn't so accurate, but you've got some hard data around that, but then you can help with training and things. So So that's the recommendation we're making. What do you, as real world managers, is that impractical? Are we missing something there? What do you think? And Greg, you're in front of me now, so
Yeah, that sounds. I think that would be a very useful way to do it, right? And I think it needs to be done at a whole kind of organizational level, so that it'd be a great area for your HR partner to help you with in terms of assessing and keeping track and reminding you 6 months later or 3 months or whatever the timeline is to do that review. So yeah, I think so, and I think it is a shareable skill across the sales organization as well.
Perfect, thank you. And Malcolm, from your perspective?
Yeah, completely agree with the conclusion. I think it would improve things for me personally. I think for a lot of people, I think it would improve. Is it practical? Yes, it is. And I'm going to answer a different question, which is, okay, so why don't we do it then? And I think the reason why we don't do it is if you think about your priority when you're hiring, it's to get a warm body in a hole in the organization chart.
Yeah.
And we tend, and certainly in the earlier first half of my career, I only thought about hiring when I had a vacancy. And the second you get the offer out to the candidate, you wipe the sweat off your brow and you go back to your job.
Yeah.
That's the wrong mindset. Hiring it's job number one. It's a key part of the leader's job. So we need to step out of that and look at the process. And I think that's why we don't do what you've described in the conclusion there is we tend to think the job's done when we've made the offer to the candidate.
Yeah.
And I think we need to change that way of thinking a little bit. I think it's very difficult in a lot of organizations. I'm under no illusions as to the pressures that most sales engineering managers are under. I don't think anybody's sitting there with a 6-hour window in their calendar each week. But it's a question of prioritization, I think.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so from our side, we've got through all the topic areas we wanted to speak about. Is there anything else that either of you wanted to add or ask us or bring into the conversation?
I think one thing we only brushed on a little bit was about bias in the process as well. And I think the higher the requirements you have at the beginning can rule out candidates of unusual backgrounds and things like that. So you might need to reinforce this with the team helping you source candidates and make sure they're the right people. But things like looking out for a shorter experience time in the role or in similar roles. You see far too many positions that are looking for a very senior level of experience at a low level of pay, or for an area that those people don't exist or they're unobtainable. But being open-minded of different backgrounds into your role, and the diversity and inclusion aspect as well, right? Asking for an engineering degree might rule out a large number of people who could be really good for your job.
Yeah 100%.
I believe it's a very good point, and I believe this is maybe the main reason why usually the hiring managers talk with us about the personality and what they're looking for in terms of presentation skills, for example, or conducting a demo. Maybe this is a common idea among hiring managers, that you do not actually care about the diploma or 3 years of experience or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen candidates come in with like a no degree at all or a journalism degree for a hard science kind of product, and it's surprising the fresh kind of approach that they bring in and how useful it is for customers. And just thinking of a relatable kind of person for your customer to deal with that can do the job would be a fresh way to look at it.
Super. That seems to me a great a great kind of topic area to finish the conversation. So I would like to really wholeheartedly thank you both for taking the time to speak. It's been a really interesting, varied conversation. Yes, really appreciate both of your time.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Malcolm. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for doing this work. This survey, the results of what you've done here, I think it's required reading for any hiring pre-sales manager. I think everybody should be made to go away and read this and really figure out what it means for them. It's a great body of work. Thank you very much, both of you, for getting this done.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Malcolm. That's great. Brilliant.
Cheers.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.